Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Good morning, sir. Audio.
Yes.
And my screen is also visible to all of you, right?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Very good morning. So basically, we are having class today as well as we are having class tomorrow, right? So we have taken a day off. So we will adjust that in tomorrow. So tomorrow we are having class, right? So in our last session, what we have discussed about SQL data adapter, and we discussed about what is data set and the data table, and then we discussed how to create the data table without using the database, right? We can create a data table, we can create a data column, right? Then we will add data column to the data table. Then we will create a data row, right? And once we create data row, we can add a data row to the data table, and then we can loop through the data table by using the data rows collection property, right? So basically, we are going to continue today's. We are also going to continue that discussion, right? Data table basically provides some inbuilt method, right? And what are the important methods that are available as part of the data table class or data table object, right? And how we can use them. That is what first we are going to discuss, and then we will discuss data set, right? And so for our understanding, we are going to use the student DB database, what you can see on my screen. Let us first create data database, right? So guys, in each and every chapter, I'm going to create the new, I'm going to provide the database script, right? So that if you are not attending, if you are directly jumping to a particular chapter, then also you'll find the database script, right? So, this is a SQL Server database, right? What is the use of this go statement means once you create this student DB, if you are writing go means what it will create and it will proceed, and it will then once you write this use student DB means it is going to use the student DB, and inside the student DB it is going to create the student table, and then it is going to insert this four records. Currently you can see learn to trade DB is selected, right? Once I execute this statement, let's see what happens. See, student DB is created. Now, here notice lot to trade. I'm using the student DB, right? So as soon as I use the student DB, which database is selected? Student DB, right? Now, if I am executing this code, right, create statement, it is going to execute inside the student DB. And if you are not sure why it is not showing inside the databases folder location, right, then you just need to refresh this. Once you refresh this, you will see that student DB is created. Inside this student DB, the student table is going to be created, right? You can see this is my student table, right? Currently student table doesn't have any data. Let me add few records. Four records I have added. Now, if you select this table, then you will see those four records, right? So these four records, that is what I'm showing here, right? So once your database table is, I mean your database part is ready, then let us try to understand some of the, let us first understand how to use data table. Then I will show you different methods, right? Right. So basically, if you want to communicate with the database, what are the mandatory things? First of all, you need to create the connection string, right? This is the connection string, which is pointing to my SQL Server Database student DB, right? And here SSPI integrated security means I'm using with the Windows authentication, right? And I will show you one example how to use your database SQL authentication tomorrow, but for now it is Windows authentication, right? And this is my server name or IP address or machine name you can consider. In this IP address or in this server, right, the database is going to be student. Then you need to create an instance of a SQL connection. So you can create the instance in two ways, right? You can use this connection dot connection string property, and you can specify this if you don't like this approach, right? But if I'm using this approach unnecessary, I have to return this extra line of code. So right, so I always prefer to reduce the number of statement, right? So I'm going to use this approach. Then I'm using this SQL data adapter of class, right? I'm providing the select statement that I want to execute and the connection object on which I'm going to execute this statement, right? Then I'm creating one data table instance, and then I'm calling this field method and providing this data table, right? What is the use of this field method? Means it will open the connection, right? It will execute this statement. It will fetch the data. It will fill this data table with the records, right? With the result set written by this select query, and then it will automatically close the database connections. These are the functionality which is going to implement by this fill method behind the scene, right? So once the database is filled, right, then this data row, right, so is going to be page, right? So this data table means it's a collection of records, or you can say collection of rows, and I want to access each rows from the collection, right? And then some dt.rows you can access, and it is going to give it is going to read the data row by row, right? And for this you do not need an open connection. Open and active connection is not required, right? So if you are using SQL data reader, then at that time open and active connection is required. For DataSet data table, they are independent, right? They are not provider specific. You can say this is data table. It is not a SQL data table or Oracle data table. Why? Because it is not specific to any provider, right? And you can see this is the reason why it is belongs to system.data namespace, right? Then once you read the data row by row, then you can access the data like this. Other option is also there. What is the other option? You can access the data row by using the integer index position. Clear? Right. So this is what we have discussed so far. Even though it is also possible to create, right? It is also possible to create the data table without using database. That is what we have already discussed, but that is not required, right? If you are not going to store, if you are not fetching the data from the database, then it doesn't make any sense to create the data table to store the data. In that case, we can create a class, we can create a collection, and in that collection, we are going to store the data. Is that clear? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we are going to discuss two different methods. One is clone method, another one is copying method. So what is the difference between these two? When to use clone method and when to use copy method? Say, if you are having one data table which is full of data, right? Let me tell you that this is my data table, right? This is my data table. And inside this data table, I am having the student data. Now you might be have two scenario. You want to create a new data table with the same structure as this data table along with the same data. One option is there. You want same structure, same structure and the same data. You want same structure and the data. Second option is there. You want same structure and without data. So instead of saying data, I can say with data. Same structure and with data, same structure without data. What it means? It means I want a new data table or a different data table which is similar to this original data table, as well as this data table should have the data what this original data table has. Second option is that I want to create a new data table with the same structure as this original data table, but without having the data. If you want to create the same structure with data, then you have to reuse the copy method. And if you do not want the data, but you only want the structure, then you have to use clone method. Clear, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's say
The data.
Sorry?
Data structure.
Data in the sense, exactly, data structure in the sense of what is the, see, whenever you are creating this data table, so whenever you are filling this data, see, behind the scene, what is going to happen? This data table structure is going to be decided based on this result set. If this result set returning 4 columns, then this data table having 4 columns. If the data set first column is returning integer data, right, then that data column type is going to be integer, right? So based on the data type, based on the constraint, right? What are the rules and regulations that we have applied to our database, right? So in this case, you can see this is Varkar, this is Varkar, this is Varkar. These four are nullable type data. This is my integer primary key, right? This is going to be not null. This is going to be unique, right? And these are nothing but my column name, right? The column name, the schema you can consider the schema and constant. That is what you have applied to this student table, right? Those schema and constant are also applicable to this data table also here when you execute this select statement to fill the data, right? The same schema, the same constant, what is applicable to this original data table, I want the same thing in a different data table, or not only the schema and the constant, but also I want the data, what this original data table are having. For that purpose, I want this copy method. And now, if I only want the data table schema in the sense data table columns, data table constant, what are applicable applied to the columns, right? If you only want that and without data, then you have to use clone method. Clear?
Yes, sir. Clear.
Right. So if you want to copy data, right, then what you need to do, you have to call the copy method simply. So this is my original data table, and you just need to call the copy method, which will return a new data table, right, which is going to return a new data table with the same structure of this original data table with the data, right? Now, if you go to the definition of this copy method, so what he's saying, copies both the structure and the data for this data, right? It is going to copy both the structure and the data. Clear? Copy method copies both the structure and the data for this system.data table, right? And once you copy the data, then you can check whether this data table is not equals to null, right? If it is not equals to null, then only paste the data, right? Someone asking what is the use of this question mark operator, right? So if you see what I can do here is, let me remove these things. Let me remove these things and let me put this question mark here. Right? So this question mark is basically going to check whether this data table is null or not. If this is not null, then only it is going to invoke the properties and the method whatever you have. If it is not, then it is not going to invoke these things. Understand who is asking that question?
Yes, sir, it was me.
Right? So basically, this is a null checking operator, right? So it will check whether the corresponding object is null or not. If it is null, then I'm not going to invoke this operator, or I'm not going to invoke this method properties or whatever, right? If it is not null, means this object is not null, then only I'm going to invoke the method or properties or whatever it is, right? So you can use like this. This is a null operator, right? And then what null, not exactly null operator, it is going to check the nullability, right? Whether the object is null or not.
So
So
it will skip that particular line. Is that the case if it is null?
exactly. So see, in this case, suppose if you are writing this statement, if, right, data table is not, uh, if the data table is not equals to null, right, then I'm going to print this statement. This block is should execute, else, right? So I'm going to execute this block of code, right? So basically, in these things you can simply do by using these things, right? So basically, it is going to check if if it is not null, then only it is going to invoke this property. If it is null, then it is not going to invoke this property, right? So if you want to write something like, if it is not equals to null, then invoke this, else don't do anything, right? So in this case, what is I'm doing? If it is not equals to null, then only I'm going to invoke this property, right? So these things, so what is this returning? Right? So what I'm doing here, I'm checking if this property is not equals to null, then only I'm calling this property. I'm sorry, this object is not equals to null, then I am calling this rows property on that object, right? And the same thing, this is, statement can be rewritten like this. So whatever this if condition null checking what you are written, this is similar to this one, right? This is similar to this one. So whatever I'm doing here, you are understanding this statement.
Yes.
So what mean if copied data table is not equals to null, then go and access the rows property, right? And the same thing I can written without using this if condition by using this statement. So in this statement, so in this case, if this copy data table is null, is this block is going to execute?
No.
So that means this statement will not execute. That means this method property what you are calling on this object that calling is not going to be happen. The same thing is also going to happen in this case. If the copy data table is null, then this accessibility, right? What you are accessing is not going to be happen, right? But in that case, if the copy data table is not equals to null, this statement what you are calling, right? This rows property that is going to be executed. The same thing is also going to happen in this case. Clear?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me remove this thing, right? So in that case, yeah. So basically, in this case, you can see you can access the rows and you can store that rows inside this data row and you can access this. Even you can access using the integer index, right? Now clone data table, right? Clone data table means what will happen. So in this case, it will only copy the data, copy the structure of the data table, not the data. So in that case, what I'm checking, right? The object is created, right? The object is not null, but there is no rows, right? So how you can get now rows dot count. So if there is any row, then that number, how many number of rows are there? That count it is going to return. If there is no row, then what it will return? It will return 0, right? Then in that case, if there is no row, this block is not going to be executed, right? If there is no row, then this block is not going to be executed. And if there is rows, then this for each loop is going to execute and whatever the data, right, that is going to be printed. So in our case, you will see that as we are using the clone method, right? So let me first give you the definition of what this clone method is saying all about. So clone the structure of the data table, including system.datatable.schema and the constraints, right? But not the data. Right? So you can see it is clone the structure of the data table, right? Including all data table schema and a constant, right? Whatever number of I mean whatever the data table schema and a constant, right? Everything is going to be copied, but without data, right? So in this case, data is not copied. So if that is not copied, then the rows.count column, right? It is going to give me 0. If it is giving me 0, then this block of code is going to be skipped. Then in that case, else block is going to be executed. In X block, first of all, I'm showing that the clone data table is empty. Then I'm going to add some data row into this data table. And how I can add rows now in clone data table dot rows dot add property add method I'm using, and I'm providing the data, right? So this is the see in this case what is the structure of the data table: ID, name, email, and a mobile, right? And those things I'm passing here. So first ID, name, email, and mobile. I have added 2 data rows, and after adding these 2 data rows, I'm printing the data. Now you will see these 2 data rows inside this clone table data, and whatever data for records in our student table that you will find in original data table, that you will find also in copy data table, right? Let me run the application and show you the output. See, so this is the original data table. Whatever data we are having inside our database, those 4 color records you can see. Copy data table, the same thing, same as original data table. But to clone data table, first of all, it is saying clone data table is empty. Adding data to clone data table, After adding two records or two rows, those two rows are going to be displayed on this screen, right? That means the clone data table doesn't copy the data, it only copy the structure, right? You can see the same structure. How you can make saying that same structure? See, in this case, what is the first column? ID, then a name, then email, then mobile number. Now what I'm trying to do, I'm going to give a different things, right? Suppose instead of 101, let me, I'm providing another integer value, 102. Let me give here 103. And let's see what happens when we run this application. Right? What happened? Can anybody see? Input array is longer than the number of a column in this table. What it means? Now, in this data table, what I am using, right? That data table having 4 number of columns, right? And how many elements I am passing? I am passing 5. So input array is longer than the number of columns available in this table. Understand?
Yes.
Right?
So,
yeah.
So on line number 56, like we are trying to add data in the already cloned data table. So for an example, instead of 101, if we are passing string in the data, then also it will give error, right? Because
yes. Let me pass some value, right? Some value. So in this case, let me remove this one, right? Let me remove this one.
Yeah.
Right? Let me run this application. What is saying?
Yes.
Input string was not in a correct format. Could not store some value in ID column. Understand?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
whatever the input you are passing, that is not in a correct format, right? So it cannot be stored inside the ID column. Expected type is integer 32, right? And this value what you are passing, this is not an integer value, right?
Yes.
Clear?
Yes. Thank you.
So this is how you can, so sometimes why I'm showing this now, sometimes you are having a data table, you want to do, you want to create a data table from an existing data table, right? Or you just want to create clone a data table. For that purpose, I'm showing you this thing, right? Again, the same thing I'm going to show you once I start discussing the data sets, right? So now sometimes what happens now once, so as we mentioned, if we are using SQL data reader, then we cannot update the data. Data cannot be updated. Update in the sense you cannot add new data, you cannot remove data, you cannot update the data, right? These things are not possible if you are using SQL data reader. But we are going to, but now we are using data table. Data table means you can see, you can add the new data, that is also possible. If you want, right now, what is my requirement? I want to remove some data. Right? I want to remove some data. How I'm going to do this, right? For removing the data or for deleting the data from the data table, we can use two methods. One is remove method, another one is delete method, right? The remove method will remove the row from the collection, right? So you can see there is a, in data table, there is a rows collection, right? This rows collection actually going to hold the data, right? So whenever I'm calling this remove method, then that particular row is going to be deleted from the rows collection. But when I'm using the delete method, it will not remove the row immediately, rather it will mark that row is ready for removal, right? That mark that row as ready for removal. And then when if you call this accept changes method, then if that row is marked as deleted, right, that row is going to be deleted. And if you call the reject changes method, then it will roll back, right? So what it means if you are using a remove method, then immediately it will delete the record. But if you are using the remove method, then it will not, if you are using the delete method, then it will not delete the row immediately. It will mark the row as deleted, but not deleted immediately. Then based on the action you take, right? If you call the accept changes method, then that row is going to be deleted. If you call the reject changes method, then that row is going to be rolled back, right? So basically, we are having the option whether we want to delete the row or whether we want to roll back the row if we are using the delete method. And if we are using remove it, it is going to simply remove the record, right? Let us understand this with an example. Right, so you can see this is my original data table. The same thing I'm not going to explain again and again, right? I'm using SQL data adapter, right, calling the fill method to fill this data table. And before deletion, right, before calling the remove and delete method, I'm just printing the data what is there inside my data table, right? So you can see this is my data table, right? Then what I'm trying to do is, if you see this database, right? If you see the database, there is a employee, there is a student, right, whose ID is 101. Now, what I'm trying to do is, I'm looping through the rows, right? And I'm checking if the ID is 1001, then please call the delete method. So when you call the delete method row.delete, right? So that row is not going to be deleted immediately, right? Rather that row with ID 101 mark as deleted, right? So what exactly it means in this case, when you call the delete method on that particular row, right? So in this case, you can see rows. From that row, suppose whenever it is going to loop for each row, and whenever it finds the row with the ID 1001, right? This row column ID, basically it is going to give this column value, right? When it find that row with the value 1001, then in that case, the if condition is going to be true. And in that case, it is going to call the delete. So when it call the delete method, then it will mark that row as deleted, right? Mark that row as deleted, but it will not delete the row. Then we have two options, right? What are the options? You can call the accept changes method on the data table, or you can call the reject changes method on the data table. Now, if I call the accept changes method, then you will see that from the original data table or from my data table, this row is going to be deleted. And if I call this reject changes method, then you will see that the data is going to be, I mean the reject changes method means the data is going to be rolled back. Let me show you both options. But guys, remember, whatever deletion we are performing, that is on my data table, but not on the database. Because these things are, this data table data set, right? They are in memory object, right? They are storing the data in memory, right? If you are going to perform any operation, that operation is going to be performed on the data table. Later, I will show you how to update the data, bulk update, bulk insert, right? That things we will discuss in our coming session. But for now, the changes, whatever I'm doing, whatever the deletion operation I'm performing, that is going to be performed on my data table, not on the database, right? So let me first show you these things, reject changes, right? And after calling the reject changes, right, I'm calling this, and then again, I'm printing the data, right? So here, basically, I'm deleting the record 101. See, you can see, right? So before deletion, 4 records are there. After deletion, how many records are there? 3 records are there. Which record is deleted? Anurag. So what is the ID of Anurag? 101. That record is deleted. Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now let's see what happens if I'm calling the reject changes method. Right. So now I'm going to call the reject changes method. Right. So reject changes method, even though you mark this record as deleted, but you can see you are calling the reject changes method, means which will roll back that row, and you can see that row is as it is in the data table. That means the deletion is not happened because you roll back the changes. Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now what will happen if I mark this row as deleted? I comment these two statements, either accept changes or reject changes, then I'm trying to fetch the data again, right? So guys, remember 101 record is marked as deleted. So once the record is marked as deleted, you cannot access the deleted row information. Either you have to commit or you have to roll back, then only you can access the data. But if one row is marked as deleted, then you cannot access that data, right? For example, let me show you this row with ID 103, right? Right. So you can see 101, 102 records are shown, right? But when he trying to access the record, right, 103, and that record is marked as deleted, so you cannot access that record information because that record is in intermediate state, right? What do you mean by intermediate state? That record might be deleted from the data table or might be rolled back into the data table. So as we have not committed the operation, so you cannot access that intermediate data or that deleted data, right? Either you have to call the accept changes method or you have to call the reject changes method, right? Once you call this accept changes method means it will commit the changes, right? That means the data is going to be deleted, and once you call the reject changes method, it will roll back the changes. That is, whatever delete operation that is going to be rolled back, the data is not going to be deleted. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. So this is all about this. Okay. So we have discussed this delete method. Now I'm going to show you the remove method, right? For the in the case of a remove method, there is no accept changes, reject changes, right? Remove means the data is going to be removed immediately, right? So this is the same example. This is my original data table. I'm filling the data table. I'm printing the data before deletion. And here I'm simply calling the original data table dot rows dot remove, right? And what I'm removing the row, right? And then you can see the original data table dot rows, and that is going to be displayed immediately, right? That means you call the remove method means that the row is going to be removed immediately. Clear?
Yes.
Right. So this is the difference between your remove method and delete method, right? In the interview, you ask this question: what is the difference between remove method and the delete method when I'm performing on a data table? So you have to tell this thing. Remove method means the row is going to be removed immediately. There is no chance to roll back that operation, right? But if I'm using delete method, then I have a chance, right? Whether I want to commit the changes or I want to roll back the changes. That is possible using delete method, but not possible using this remove method. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So we have discussed data table. We have discussed how to work with the SQL Server using data table. We have discussed without using SQL Server, we can also create the data table and we can do whatever operation we want. Now it's time to discuss the most important concept I can say in edu.net, that is data sets, right? Because see, why I'm saying this is important because most of the time you will see this data set concept, right? Let's see how we can use this data set and what are the things you can do with the data set and all those things, right? So basically, first of all, before going further, the thing that you need to remember, data set basically it's a collection of data tables. What is data table? Data table going to represent the data in a tabular format. That is the way you are storing the data in a table in a database. In the same way, you can store the data inside a data table, right? For example, okay, let me run this application. Right? So you can see this is my data table. So ID, name, email, mobile. In this way, the data is going to be stored in the database or not?
Yes.
Right? So what you need to do? Just just move your mouse pointer over the data table. Right? There is an option you will find view. Click on that drop down arrow. Select the data table visualizers. Then it will visualize how the data is stored inside the data table. This is similar to your database table, right? They are going to be stored the data in the form of rows and columns, or you can say tabular format, right? So this is the point that you need to remember. Dataset represent a subset of the database in memory, right? So how the data is going to be stored inside a database, in the same manner, you can store the data in your memory, right? Inside your .NET application by using the concept called a database. Right? That means ADO.NET dataset is a collection of data tables that contains the relational data in tabular format, right? Even though we are using the dataset, behind the scene, data table is there, and the data table is actually going to store the data. It does not require an active and open connection to the database, right? As data table is not require an active and open connection to the database to perform the different kind of operation, right? So dataset is also not required. Why? Because behind the scene data table is only there. If data table is not required an active and open connection, then why dataset required, right? So dataset also is not required an active and open connection to the database, right? The dataset is based on the disconnected architecture. That is what I have shown you. But if you are using SQL data reader, right, then that is required an active and open connection. See, we have seen that example, reader.read method, right? But that read method is going to read the data from the database. For that purpose, it required an active and open connection. But in this case, the data is read from the database, stored in memory inside the data table. So no need to again go and check the data in the database, because the data is already with us in our .NET application, right? This is the reason why it is used to fetch data without interacting with any data source, right? As it is the in-memory data object. If you want, you can paste the data from the database. If you do not want, if you want to create your own data set, right, that is also possible, right? So the ADO.NET dataset class is the core component for providing data access in a disconnected environment. The dataset class belongs to system.data namespace, right? Let us understand this concept with one example, right? So for this purpose, let's assume we are having two tables. One is customer and another is order. And then we want to add both these data tables to the data set, and then we want to log the data into the console. So basically what I'm going to show you, first of all, I will show you data set without using SQL Server. Then I will show you data set using SQL Server Database, right? First of all, let's see how we can create the data set, how we can create the data table, how we are going to add those data table inside the data set, all these things manually. And then I will show how to use dataset with SQL Server Database. So for this purpose, what I'm trying to do is, as I told you, dataset is a collection of data tables. So first of all, I will create two data tables. One is customer and another one is order. And then I will show you how I can add these two data tables inside the data set. And then I will show you how to add the data into the data table and how you can print those data in .NET application, right? So you know how to create a data table, right? The structure is this. First of all, you need to create an instance of a data table like this. Here I'm providing this table name as customer. Then I'm going to add few data column into this customer data table, right? So how to create a column, write a data table, the data column instance you need to create. You need to provide the name of the column and what type of data you want to store, right? Apart from this, many other things are there, right? Allow null, right? Is unique, is primary key, right? What is the length of the maximum length, right? Many properties are there available with the data column. We have already discussed, right? If you want, then you can also add those things, right? But here I'm only going with the name and what type of data I'm going to store. So with these two properties, I'm going with this data column, right? So I have created three data column, right? See here, data column object name is customer ID, but what is the column name that you are providing the data column constructor? So the column name is going to be ID name and a mobile, and you can see each column I'm adding into the columns property of this data table customer, right? Once you add this column side into the data table, then you can add rows into the you can add rows, right? How you are going to add rows? So how many columns are there? 3 columns, right? Customer dot rows collection dot add 1 row and 2 rows. So basically in this case, I'm creating a data table object with the name customer. Then I'm adding 3 properties to this data table, right? or you can say 3 column to this data table. And what are the name? ID column, which type is integer, name, which type is string, mobile, which type is string, right? Then I'm adding 2 rows into this customer data table by using the rows.add method, right? In the same way, I'm also going to create the orders data table. You can see this is my orders data table. Here I'm also adding 3 columns, right? But in this case, all the 3 columns are going to be of type integer. ID, customer ID, amount. You can see int 32, int 32, int 32. So all these 3 columns are going to be type integer, right? And then what I'm trying to do, I'm adding 2 rows into this customer data table, orders.rows.add, and this is the value. Any question from anyone how I'm creating these data tables?
No.
So we have already discussed this data table, right? So this is what we have so far discussed. Now the things that what we are going to understand, right? What we are going to understand, how we are going to create a data set and how we are going to add those 2 data tables into the data set, right? So you can see, so data set is basically, what is data set? It's a collection of a data tables, right? So basically, as it's a collection of a data table, so we can add 1 or more data table inside a single data set. So you can see here, I'm creating the data set, right? Object by using the default constructor, right? Then I'm adding the data table inside the tables collection, dataset.tables.add customer. What is customer? This is nothing but my customer data table, right? And then I'm adding what? Orders. Orders is nothing but my orders data table. So how you are going to add? Now inside this data set, there is a collection of the tables. Inside that collection, I'm going to add the data, right? It's the data from the data set, right? So again, fetching the data set means what? So basically you are having 2 options, right? So basically you are having 2 options means what? Now by using that, first of all, tell me in which property we are adding the data table? Inside the tables property? Yes or no? Guys, inside which property of a data set we are adding the data table? Inside the tables collection or tables property, right? So basically dataset dot tables 0, right? So index position 0. So dataset dot tables 0. Guys, right? So in this case, you can see dataset dot tables 0. Tables 0 means which data table added first to the dataset tables collection. That is nothing but your table 0. And in this case, table 0 is nothing but your customer data table, right? Dataset dot tables 0 means customer data table dot rows. So how many number of rows are there inside the customer data table that you can access by using this for each loop, right? And here I'm using the tables 0 means the integer index position, right? Even though you can access this in using integer index position, you can also access the tables by using the names property. So you can see while creating the table, I'm providing a custom name. So what is the name of this table? Orders. What is the name of this table? Customer, right? So in the same way, right, you can also access by using the integer index position, or you can access by using the string table name, right? So let me show whatever we have discussed. Let me show you what with an example. Right. So this is my customer data table. Inside this customer data table, I'm adding 3 columns, right? One is ID, name, and a mobile. Then I'm adding 2 rows into the customer data table. Then I'm creating the orders data table. Again, inside this order data table, I'm adding 3 rows, right? So you can write, see, while providing the type of, right, type of, you can provide system.int32. You can directly provide the int32, that is also applicable. Why? Because you are already including the namespace, right? So if you remove this namespace, then it is mandatory to provide the fully qualified name, right? Namespace dot class name, or directly you can provide, or you can also provide the shorthand name for int32. What is the shorthand name for int32? Int, right? So that is what you can also provide. Then I'm adding 2 columns. then I'm creating the dataset object, then I'm adding both the data tables into the tables collection of dataset object, right? Then I'm fetching the data from the dataset tables, right? So dataset internally doesn't hold any data. Inside the dataset, there is data table, and those data table are going to hold the data. So fetching the dataset means fetching the data from any of the data tables which are there inside the database, inside the dataset, right? Inside the dataset, we are having two data tables. Which data table you want to access, right? You want to access the first data table, pass the index position as 0. You want to access data from the second data table, pass the index position 1 as 1. So dataset dot table 0 means it is nothing but your data table, and from this data table, I'm calling this rows collect properties, which will going to return me all the rows that are available inside the table 0 data table. Table 0 in the sense, in this case, customer, right? And then you can, this is the simple thing, you can access the data by using the string index key, right? String key, or you can access the data by using integer index position, right? Both the options are available, right? So this is my customer data table, right? And in this case, I access the data by using the index position. Even you can also access the data by using the, what you can say, you can access the data by using the, guys, tell me what is this?
Order table.
Name of data table.
Index.
Data table. This is the string key. This is the integer index position, and this is the string key, means in this case, this is the table name, right? And the same thing you can access by using the string key name or by using the integer index position. That is also possible, right? Now let me run the application, right? So basically the thing what you need to understand is, if you understand data table, then dataset is not difficult to understand, because behind the scene data table is going to be worked. So you can see the data is there. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right?
So,
Yeah, ask me.
sorry. So this is like, I mean, like instead of getting the data table independently, this is the means where we can access the tables using dataset. Like we can use access all the tables using dataset. That is what
Yes,
the difference is.
it's basically, it's a grouping the data tables, right? So the thing, what exactly I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to make you understand is why I'm going to store two different data tables. Suppose you are executing one command, right? One storage procedure you are executing. That storage procedure returning two select statement, right? Or you are executing a SQL command, right? That SQL command containing a two select statement, right? Then in that case, you cannot store two select statement inside a single data table, right? But in that case, you can store that data inside a data set, right? That's data set means one of the data table going to contain the first select statement data, second data table is going to store the second select statement data, right? But this is not possible if you are using data table, right? So I have shown you, right? SQL data adapter dot you are creating the SQL data adapter object, right? Then using the data adapter fill method, you are filling the data set, you are filling the data table, right? So if you are filling the data table means you can filling a single select statement data inside a single data table. But if you are having two select statement, then how you can store those two select statement inside a single data table? Is that possible? No,
No,
it's not possible. Then in that case, you need to use dataset. And once you use dataset, then behind the scene, two data table is going to be created. One data table containing the first select statement, second data table going to contain the select statement, right? Clear? As dataset having the capability to store multiple data table, that is what I'm showing here. And for this example, dataset is not required, because why in this example, why I'm going to use dataset? Even my data table I can directly use.
yes, correct.
Right? In this example, the data table is I can directly use, but there is no need to define this dataset and all these things, right? If I remove all these things, then that is also going to be fine, right? So what is the data table name? This is customer data table, right? So I can directly go here and I can use the customer.rows collection, and I can directly go here and I can directly use the orders collection, right? Orders.rows. That is fine. In this example, not required. But why I'm showing this? Because see, whenever you are executing two select statement, then the data set containing those two select statements. And how it is possible? This is possible because this data set having the capacity or having the capability to store multiple data tables, right? I'm showing this example so that later when I will execute a storage procedure or I will execute a select statement or a SQL statement which containing two select statement, then in that case, you do not have any doubt that how two select statement data is going to be stored inside a data set, right? For that, to understand, I'm showing this example, Manoj, right?
Okay.
Any question from anyone?
No.
Okay. See,
No.
it's simple. See, if you are creating a database, is it mandatory that a database is going to store a, so simple question. If I'm creating a database, am I going to create a database for each table, or I can create a database where I can store multiple tables?
One time you can get
So you can create a single database and inside that single database, you can store multiple tables. This is the same case. So dataset means it is a similar to your database, right? But in this case, the data is going to be stored in memory. And in the case of a database, the data is going to be stored in the database, right? So what is the, see, we have already discussed data reader and we have discussed this data set. Sometimes interviewer or ask you when to use data reader and when to use data set, that you should know. See, when you want to cache the data locally in your application so that you can manipulate the data, and when you want to work with disconnected architecture, then in that case, you need to use data set. Because if you are using data set means what? You are storing the data in memory. You are storing the data in your application and you can manipulate the data, right? You can add new data, you can remove data. All these things are possible if you are using data set. And more importantly, it is work on disconnected architecture. You do not need an open and active connection. It doesn't require an active and open connection, right? And when to use data reader, if you do not want to cache the data locally, then you need to use data reader, which will improve your application performance, right? Because in this case, it is not storing the data directly, it is fetching the data and doing the operation, right? So it will improve your application performance. But you only need to go when you do not want to manipulate the data in your application. And data reader works on a connection oriented architecture. What it means it always require an active and open connection to the database. Clear? Simply,
Yes.
it work on disconnected architecture, it work on connection oriented architecture. If you want to cache the data locally, then you need to use dataset. And if you do not want to cache the data locally, then you need to use data reader. As simple as it is. And all these four things we have already discussed. Clear, guys?
So just one doubt, like is out of these two any recommended method like to use
So
or
it's basically depend on your requirement, right? Suppose you want to manipulate the data, right? Once you fetch the data, if you want to manually, right? Suppose you are fetching that data, right? In this case, you want to remove some of the record, right? Then this is not possible. So the example what I have shown you, remove, delete method, right? Those things are not possible with a SQL data reader, right? You manipulate in the sense what? You want to add new data, you want to remove the data locally, right? This is not possible using data reader. And so basically, I cannot recommend any data set or data reader. So basically, this is recommended based on your project requirement, right? Project requirement, you simply need to fetch the data and display it. No need to use a data set. But if you want to fetch the data and you want to do some manipulation manually, right? Suppose you are fetching the data and inside the data, some salary column is there, right? And while displaying the salary, you want to add a bonus for some amount, right? That means what? You want to manipulate the data or locally. This is not possible using data reader. For that case, you need to use data set. right? So basically, based on your project requirement, you have to choose whether you need to use dataset or data river. Clear?
Okay.
Right. So we have discussed dataset without using database. Now it's time to move further and try to understand how to use this dataset with SQL Server data. So what is dataset? We have already discussed. It is a collection of a data tables that contains the relational data in memory in tabular format. Right. That is the definition, and it doesn't require an active and open connection to the database in order to fetch the data. That means what? Now that means the data set is based on disconnected oriented architecture, right? Disconnected architecture. Right? This is the reason why it is used to fetch data without interacting with the data sources, right? In our last example, or in this example, you can see I'm not using any data source, but still I'm able to use data set, and data set belongs to which namespace I have already shown you using system.data. Right? Now let us try to understand this data set using one console application, right? So by using one real-time scenario you can consider, or by interacting with the database, and for that purpose I'm going to create a different DB, right? Shopping cart DB, already the database is there. Let me delete this one, and let me close the existing connection, right? So now what I'm trying to do, I'm going to use create the shopping DB. Using the shopping DB, inside the shopping DB, I'm going to create a customer table. I'm going to create orders table, right? In our previous example, I have created the data table manually, one data table for customer, one data table for order, right? And then I'm storing the data. But in this case, I'm not going to create those things manually. Rather, I'm going to use the database, right? Because most of the time, you need to interact with the database, right? So in this example, let me run this one, right? The database with the required data, with the required table are created. So you can see inside this tables folder, you will see my customer table. If you want to paste the data, you can see 3 records are there, and inside the orders table, we are also having 3 records, right? So the database part is over, right? Now we need to understand how to use dataset to paste the data and show it on the console, right? For that purpose, what I'm trying to do is I'm creating the connection object, because this is mandatory. While creating the connection object, I'm passing the connection string. And in this case, you can see I'm using a single select statement. So in this case, I'm using a single select statement. And as it's a single select statement, you can store this inside a data table and inside a, right? Right? So in this case, you can do these things, right? If you want, you can store this inside a data set, or you can store inside a data table. We have already discussed the data table part, so I'm not going to discuss this thing. In this case, I'm going to use the data set, right? So, okay, let me, and in this case, I have put some comment line. Let us try to understand this. So create the SQL data adapter instance by specifying the command text and the connection object. What it means? It means this is my command text, and this command text is going to execute on this connection object. And this connection object is created by using this connection string, and this connection string pointing to the shopping cart DB on this machine, right? And on this shopping cart DB on this machine, this select statement is going to be executed. And once this select statement is executed, so it is going to return me this customer data, right? This data it is going to return, right? And this data I'm going to fill inside this data set, right? So now filling the data set using the fill method of SQL data adapter object. So we have already discussed what we discussed. Okay, now you guys tell me what this fill method is going to do. Anyone?
It's going to fill that data into a data table of data set.
That is the thing, you know. I just want to know what are the things it is not only going to fill the data. Apart from filling the data, that is one of the main operation. Other things are also going to be done by this fill method. Right?
Creation of a table.
No.
Open the connection and
Exactly.
close the connection.
Exactly. It is going to open the connection, right? You can see I have not written any connection.open statement. It is going to open the connection. It is going to execute this command on the database. It is going to fetch the result set of this SQL statement. It is going to fill that result set with the data set data table, right? And once it fill the result set, right, with the data table within a data set, it is going to close the connection. 5 things are happening behind the scene. We have already discussed, right? So open the connection, execute the command, retrieve the result, fill the data table, and close the connection. 5 things are going to be happen behind the scene. And guys, remember this data set table having two, two things, right? If you want, you can give a name to your data set, but in this case, I'm not providing anything, right? So here we have not specified a data table name or data table will be created, right? So in this case, I have not provided the data table name. Right, so how many select statement are there inside this command text? One select statement is there. Then how many data table is going to be created? Guys, if you one select statement, then how
One
many
data
data
table.
table? One data table.
One.
And that data table at what index position?
0th index position.
0 index position, right? And guys, remember one thing, by default, right? By default, the data table name also going to be provided by dataset, right? By default, the data table name is going to be provided by the dataset. What is the name? The first data table name is going to be table. The second data table name is going to be table 1. The third data table name is going to be table 2. The fourth data table name is going to be table 3, and so on. So this is the structure, how the dataset going to provide the name to the data table by default. If you are providing any explicit name, that is going to be applicable. But if you are not providing, then by default is. So in this example, what is going to be the table name? Tell me, guys.
Customers.
Table.
Customers. What is the table name? Table.
Table.
If there is another, if there are 2 select statement, that will become the second data table, index position 1, and table name is going to be 1. So in this case, right, the data table, what it is going to be created behind this table, that is nothing but first data table, which index position is 0, and that name is going to be table, right? So once you fill the data set, right, that means filling the data set means what? It is, you are filling the data in the one of the data table, right? Then iterating through the data set. See, in this case, I can iterate data set data tables 0 dot rows. I'm accessing the data using the what property tables dot 0. And I have also told you that what is the name of the table by default? Instead of saying table name, it is better to say default table name. Later, I will show you how you can provide user defined name, right? So what is the name? Table, and it is going to be a string. So you can also access by using this table's name property, right? So now once you access the data from the data table, right, which is at index position 0 or from this default data table name, you can access by using the, okay, so it should be 0, it should be 1, it should be 2, right? So you can access the 0, 1, and 2. And in this case also, I'm going to access the same thing, right? So let me comment these things because 2 times not required, right? So now if I run the application, then you will see the data as expected. Right? So you are getting the data as expected or not? So the thing that you need to remember, whenever you are filling a data set, give me 1 minute, guys. Right? So whenever I'm filling the data set, right, behind the scene, the data table is going to be created and the data table actually filled. So filling the data set means we are filling the data sets. Filling the data set means we are filling the data table. By default, the data table is going to be created with the index position 0 first data table, and the table name is going to be table. Clear, guys? Any question from this example? Guys?
No. No.
Okay. So next, what we are going to discuss, multiple data tables, right? So basically in this case, right, in this particular example, data table is not, data set is not required. You can create a data table, right? So in this case, instead of this, I can create the data table, right? Let me give this as name. So then you can write this like directly, data set that rows. This is possible. But if you are having a single select statement, you can store this inside the data table directly. But what is the use of data set means? Now, whenever you are returning multiple, whenever your query contains multiple select statements, right? Now, if you see this example, right, my SQL, my command text, right, my SQL statement containing two select query. One select query returning the data from the customer table, another select query returning the data from the orders table, right? As this is two different result set, right? Two different select statement. I cannot store those two data inside a single data table. This is not possible. And situations like this, data set will come into the picture, right? So in this case, right? So what I'm doing here, I'm creating the dataset object, I'm filling the dataset, right? So in this case, data table 1 will be customers data, which is at index position 0. Data table 2 will be orders data, which is at index position 1. So in this case, what is the table name?
Table 1.
Table,
The,
table one.
the table name is in this case table, and in this case, it is going to be
Table one.
table 1, right? So now I'm fetching the data, right? Accessing the data table from the data set using the integer index position. You can access 0. Tables 0. Tables 0 means which data table? The first data table, right? In this case, customer, right? So I can access the data, and the tables 1 means index position 1 means second data table, right? And you can access the data also by using the index position. You can access by using the string name. You can access, right? Now run the application and see the output. Right? So table 1 showing the customer data, table 2 showing the order data. Clear?
Yes.
Right now. So instead of using tables 0, what you can use here? You can still use table, and here you can use what?
Table 1.
Table 1, right? This is the default name. Now run the application, and again you will see the same output, right? The output is going to be same. Clear?
Yes.
Guys?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Now what is the difficult, right? So in this case, if you are storing the data, so in this case, you are creating the data set with the two table, and you understand the first data table is going to be customer and the second data table is going to be orders. But if your data set containing multiple data tables, right, then it is very difficult to remember the data tables, right, by using the index position or by using the default table name, right? Suppose your data set containing 10 data tables, then how you can identify which data table number, data table 5 is for what, data table 6 is for what, data table 10 is for what, right? You cannot simply remember the main data table, right? You cannot simply remember the database name. You can consider, right, by using the index position or by using the default table name, right? So what exactly our requirement is, we need to provide some default table name, right? So default table name is not that important. So default table name is provided by the framework itself. But what we need is we need to provide our custom table name. So instead of accessing this data table by using table and table one, right? Is not it good to access this by using customer? It's not it good to access this by using orders? Which one is giving you more meaningful, right? Using the default table name or using the custom table name? Which one is good, guys?
Custom.
Custom
Custom.
table, obviously.
Because using default one, we cannot identify every table, right? In this example, only 2 tables are there. We can easily identify, even though using an index position, we can also access. But if your data set containing 10 data table, 20 data table, it's very difficult to access those data table by using the index position and the table name, because somewhere you want to use the employee data table, right? You do not know what is the index position of an employee data table. You do not know what is the default name for the employee table, right? You cannot easily identify. But if you provide the name like employee, customer, orders, then you can easily access. And how we are going to set? Now inside this data set tables collection, there is a property called table name, right? So in this case, what is your data set? Data set name is data set, right? And there is a tables array, and inside the 0th position, inside this table name property, I'm providing that name, right? What is the name of the data table which is at the 0th location? Customer, right? Now, I want to provide the table name which is stored in the index position 1, right? What is the table in index position 1? Orders, right?
Order.
Now you can set, now you have set the customer table and you have set the orders data table, right? So now the table which is present in the index position 1, I can access that data table using customer name, and the data table which is present at index position 1, I can access with the name order, right? But guys, remember, once you provide the custom table name, then you cannot access the table, right? The data table by using the default table name. Now, if you once you provide the custom table name, the table name is replaced with this table. What initially is there, that is replaced with the customer, right? Now, if you try to access the data table by using the default name, then you will get one error, right? Let me run this application. Right, so now it will give you some error. So what error it is saying? Object reference not set one, contents get written null, right? So in this case, what I'm accessing in this case table, so there is no table with this table name inside this data set, so it is returning in null. As it is returning in null, you cannot access this rows column, right? So so in this case, so if I use this question mark, then what will happen? Is it going to give me some error, guys? So why I'm getting the error? Because I'm accessing this property on a null object, right? Once you accessing something on a null object, then you will get the error. If I'm putting this question mark here, then am I going to get any exception?
No.
No.
It is showing me error because the problem is not here. The problem is, so these things, right? So whatever accessing from the tables collection, that is going to return me null reference exception, right? So once you are calling this thing, see, in this case, many things are happening. From the data set, I'm accessing the data table. And once you access the data table, then only you are going to access the rows. So first of all, these things is going to throwing me error, right? So we need to handle these things, right? So basically, what is the reason? So you have to check whether this data table, right? Later I will show you, right, how to check whether the table, right, what you are searching is available inside the data set or not, right? So in this case, what you need to do, you need to check whether the data table, what I'm trying to access from the data set, is available inside this data set or not. That is what I'm going to show later, right? But for now, let me fix this error. So what should be the table name in this case?
So can we use that question mark with the data set, sir?
No, data set is not empty now.
So in this case, this statement is throwing me error, right? So this is indexer. So in this case, what I'm using indexer, right? So once I will take the concept called indexer, then you will see. So indexer means it is going to do something behind the scene, right? At that time, while I'm accessing the customer object using the indexer, right? At that time, it is throwing me the error, right? Okay, so guys, so do one. Let me do one thing. After this edu.net, I'm going to not after this, right? Mostly tomorrow, I'm going to show you the indexer concept, how to create the indexer, right? Manual, and how the indexers are exactly working. That is what I'm going to show you tomorrow, right? So that you will understand this thing, right? So in this case, customer, and the second data table, that what you want to access, you need to use orders, right? So once you use customer and order, right, then you will see the exact data as expected, right? Now you will see the data as expected. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? So this is how you need to work with the data set, right? Now again, there are three important methods that are available inside the data set object. One is copy, clone, and clear method. Our delete method is there, or that is also I'm going to discuss. So what is the use of a copy method? Copies both the structure and the data of the data set, right? That means what? Now, if your data set means what? It is containing some data tables. So, and data table is containing some data. So those everything, right? Table schema, relation, constraint, data, everything is going to be copied, right? If you are using the copy method. So, and the clone method means again same thing. So data set containing some data table, those data table having some schema constraint, right? So it is going to copy all the data table schema, relation, constraint, right? But it will not copy the data. Clear method means the data set, right, contains some data table. So it is going to clear the data from all the data tables, right? So let me show you this with an example. So this is my original data set. The original data set containing one data table with the name index position 0, and that name is going to be table, right? And this is my original data set. I'm fetching the data from my original data set. Now I'm creating I'm creating a new data set by calling the copy method. So as I'm calling this copy method, creating a new data set, right? That new data set also going to contain one data table, and that data table is going to contain the student table data, because it is using copy means it is not only create the same structure, right, of the data set, but also contain the data, right? So in this case, you can also see it is going to print the data. So here I'm checking if data set dot tables is not equals to null, then only fetch the data and display it. And the clone method means, as we already discussed, it is going to create the data set with the same structure but without data. Same structure in the sense, how many number of data tables are there? What is the relations between the data table? What is the constraint that are applied to each data table, right? Everything will be copied but without data. So in this case, you can see here I'm trying to access the count property. If it is greater than 0, then I'm going to paste the data. But in this case, you will see this statement is going to return me false, right? So else part will be available, and in else part, I'm saying clone data set is empty. I'm going to add some data into the clone data set, right? And how you can add? By using the data. So you know how to add data to a data table. How? Data table dot rows dot add method is there, or you can create a data row and you can add that data row. But in that case, this is nothing but my data table clone data set dot table 0. It is nothing but it is my first data table, and inside data table I'm going to add these rows and add, and the data, right, the structure should be same, right? Means there should be 4 parameter. First one is integer, next 3 are string. Anything changes, you will get the error, and then I'm looping through the data set, right? And then I'm using the clear method. Once you use the clear method means the data set is going to be empty, right? The data set means whatever the number of, you can say whatever the number of data tables, each data table is going to be empty, right? The data is going to be deleted from all the data tables that are available inside the data set. So you can say this statement is going to be print, right? Let me run the application. Right. So this is my original data set. This is my copy data set, and the copy data set, original data set are going to be same. Means the data table behind the data set means what? They are having some data table. The data table is going to be same. And the clone data set means what? Now it is going to create the data table, but without data. So in that case, you can see clone data set is empty. Then you can add the data, right? But the structure is going to be same. And then after the clear method, you can see there is no data. Clear? Guys,
Yes.
Yes.
right? This is the clear clone, copy, and clear method. Right? How to remove a data table from a data set, right? So if you want to remove the data, right, then in that case, you can use remove and delete method on the data table, right? But this is not the question to remove the data from the data table. How to remove a data table from a data set, right? Suppose you created one data set, that data set containing 5 data table. You use a few data table and later you do not need 2 data table. Then how you can remove those data table, right? Suppose my data table containing 5, my data set containing 5 data table, I want to remove a particular data table. Then how I can do this? You can do this by using the remove method. So you need to call the remove method, and to this remove method, you need to pass the data table, and that data table is going to be removed from the data set, right? And we need to call the above remove method on the tables collection property of the data set. Why? Because this is the property of the data set which is going to contain the data with tables, right? You can see table 0, table 1, table 3, like this, it is going to contain. So we have to call this remove method on the table collection property, right? Let me show you this thing practically so that you will get a better idea. Right? So this is my connection string. And this connection string, you can see I'm creating 2 tables. One is customer, another one is order, right? So customer and order 2 data set means 2 data table is going to be created behind the scene for this data set. So I'm providing the table name as a customer. I'm providing the second table name as orders, because I want to delete means I have to know the name of the table. Even though using an index position also you can delete, but always suggested and always recommended to use the name property, right? Fetching first table data, I'm fetching the first table data, right, using the table name. And this is my order data. I'm fetching the orders table data, right? Now what is my requirement? My requirement is to remove the order table data, right? So guys, while you are going to remove the order table data, first of all, you need to check, right? You need to check whether that table present in the data set or not, whether that table is removable or not, right? Sometimes you can create a read-only data table. That is what we are going to discuss later, right? Read-only data, not removable data table. That means those data tables sometimes cannot be removed, right? And that means we need to check, right? We need to check whether, so suppose I'm going to remove this order table. First of all, I need to check whether this order table is available inside the dataset or not. How you can check? Dataset.tables, is this table or is this data table contains inside this dataset? Yes, this dataset contains a data table with the name order. So in that case, it is going to return me true. Then you have to check whether that table, what I'm trying to remove, right? Dataset the tables collection, you can pass a index position or table name, right? is in this case contents method taking a string parameter, right? Contents method taking a string parameter that is nothing but the name of the table. So you can pass directly the table name. But this can remove method, it is not taking a string parameter, it is taking the data table, right? The data table that what you want to remove that you need to pass here. So how you can dataset.tables 0 or dataset.tables collection, you can specify the column name, right? So in this case, I can specify 0 also, right? What is the order table? Order table is 1, right? So I can specify tables 1 or I can specify the name of the table. So this is your data table, right? Whether this data table is removable or not. If you go to the can remove method, then you will see that verifies whether the data object can be removed from the collection, right? If it is removable, then it is going to return me true. So you need to check these two things in order to avoid exception, right? Once if both the conditions checked are true, right? If this order tables available inside this data test, and if this order table is removable, then only this if condition is going to be returned true. And in that case, we are printing this statement, deleting order data table. And how I'm going to delete dataset.tables.remove, and you have to provide the dataset table. That is what you are going to remove. So these two options are there. You can use dataset.tables1 index position, or you can provide the table name, right? Now check whether the data table order exists or not. So dataset.table.contents orders, right? If it is exist, it will return true. In that case, you will see this message. If not exist, right? Once this statement is executed, this order data table, right, going to be removed from this data set. And in that case, it is going to return a false, and you will see order data table not exist anymore, right? Let me run this application. Right? So you can see this is my customer data, this is my order data, and deleting orders data table. So where we have printed this statement, deleting order data table. That means both the condition true, order data table is available and order data table is removable. So in that case, it is returning me true. And then you can say, and once this statement is executed, line number 49, then this order table will be removed from data set, and that in that case, this statement is going to return me false, and you can see order data table not exist anymore. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, that's it for today. From tomorrow we are having class. Tomorrow we are going to discuss how to work with the storage procedure. I will show you how to work with the storage procedure using SQL data reader, how to work with the storage procedure using dataset, right? Both all these options I'm going to discuss, right? And then I'm going to show you how you can perform the bulk insert, update, delete operations, right? Transaction, distributed transaction, right? Many things are there. That is what we are going to discuss in our coming session. But tomorrow I'm basically going to keep focus on the storage procedure part, because if you are working with real-time application, then this type of statement you will never see, right? You will never write this raw SQL statement in your application, right? Most of the time, you are going to use storage procedure, right? That is what we are going to discuss tomorrow, right? I'm going to start the discussion by using SQL data reader, and then I'm going to discuss how to use with dataset. Any question from anyone?
So like, are we going to like, are we going to learn those things, like how we can import data from text file or like CSV file or Excel file into
See,
CS?
that is what, see, currently I'm not explaining how to import data from CSV or Excel file, right? But the thing that what I'm going to show you, right? The thing, see, suppose why you are going to import Excel file data means if you want to bulk insert, or if you want to insert some data bulk in a bulk manner, right? You are having 100 employees, and that 100 employee data in a CSV file, and you want to insert your data into the database. For that purpose, you do not need to perform the insert operation one by one. You need to insert all the record at a time. For that purpose,
Yes.
I'm going to show you how you can do this. right? But as of now, I have not explained the concept called file handling. So I'm not going to use that, you can say that CSV file, right? But I will show you the mechanism how you can import the data using CSV file, right? So there is a separate chapter called file handling, right? But now I'm going to show you some hard-coded data, right? And later, once we start discussing the file handling, then I will show you how you can import the data using your CSV or Excel file and the ADO.NET code, or what is I'm going to explain in our coming session, right? The same ADO.NET code can work with the CSV file.
Okay, yeah. So like, first of all, we need to learn how we can handle file.
Exactly. File handling is a separate chapter. You can see the syllabus, right? We have not discussed that yet. So once you discuss, then you will understand how to read the data from Excel file, CSV file, text file, right? And then you will understand. But what I'm going to explain you is how you can use ball copy, right? And why ball copy is very poor in performance, how you can improve the performance, right? Because that bulk insert update is a mandatory thing, right? You should know how to perform the bulk insert, bulk update, right? You should know how to work with the storage procedure, right? So how to work with the storage procedure means I do not need to write the same. I'm going to show you how to create a generic method. Generic method means one method can handle all the different storage procedure, right? The storage procedure calling statement, I do not need to write again and again. I can make a generic method which is going to execute any type of a storage procedure, and that is going to return a data set. I can create a different method where I can execute any type of a storage procedure with parameter or without parameter, no matter, that is going to return a single value, right? Everything I'm going to cover. See, it is not the basic concept, right? We are not covering only the basic concept. You are taking the advantages of advanced C# training, right? So what is required from the industry point of view, everything I'm going to cover, right? Right, because otherwise, if you see most of the institutions, they are taking ADO.NET in 1 day. In 1 day, maximum 2 days, they completed ADO.NET.
Oh, yes, even on Udemy also, like I have seen a couple of courses, like they are just covering ADO not just at a single chapter, just in 1 hour or something.
Right, so this is not possible. See, the way I'm explaining, do you think that it is going to be completed in 1 hour, 2 hour? All the concept, there are many things is there, many different approaches there, right? You need to understand what is exactly happening, right? If you are seeing this statement, right, you should know what is data set, what is these tables, zero instead of customer, can I pass integer or all these things? What is this rows and what is this data row? Right? You should know each and every keyword or a statement, whatever I'm writing or whatever you are writing in the right. Understanding is important thing, right? Once you understand, then no need to remember these things, right? You just need to see this thing and then you can memorize, yeah, this is the things and this is going to be worked in this manner, right? So everything I'm going to discuss, even I'm also going to show you what is transaction, right? So because transaction is important, right? Transaction in the sense, I'm not going to show you SQL Server transaction. I'm going to show you how to implement transactions in ADO.NET. I'm also going to show you how to implement a distributed transaction. Distributed transaction means what? Now, if you are having two different databases, right? And you want to perform some operation on both the databases by using the unique manner, right? Unique manner means it should perform all the operations successfully in database 1, and if all the operations successful in database 2, then only I'm going to commit the transaction. Otherwise, I'm going to roll back the transaction, right? Distributed means more than one databases. If you are more than one data sources you are using to perform the transaction, that is also I'm going to cover as part of this course, right? So everything I'm going to cover, but the thing is that you have to give more time, right? So the way I'm explaining, the way we are taking the time means it is not going to be a 1 month or a 2 month course. So it is going to take more time, and 100% each and every session you are going to learn something new.
Definitely. So one more question, like right now we are writing a query which is which we can execute in SQL. Like, so can we write some kind of dynamic query, for an example, to fetch data from one table and fetch data from another table, and just comparing those data?
For that purpose, I have not yet shown those things, right? So for that purpose, you need to provide some input parameters, right? So dynamic SQL query is mostly not used nowadays. Instead of, because see, if you are using dynamic SQL query, right, then what is the problem? First of all, you will get SQL injection issue, right? That is what also I'm going to cover. What is SQL injection, right? And why you should avoid using the dynamic queries, right? And how we can overcome this problem by using storage procedure. Storage procedure having some input parameter, output parameter, how you can pass input parameter to the storage procedure, right? How you can fetch the input out, how you can set the output parameter value in your application. Everything I'm going to cover. But for that, you need as part of this edu.net only I'm going to cover. It is not like I'm going to skip and I'm going to discuss later. Now only I'm going to cover. Right. So you have to understand this, right? These things, right? So simply in your if you look at the remove method, they are directly removing these things, right? They are just directly, they are not checking whether the data set contains that data table or whether that data table can be removable or not. These things they are not checking, right? Because why I'm using this thing, because I know the importance of this thing, right?
Yes, because in real-time programming, you have to always check, right? So you are
Right.
teaching in such a way that like it can be helpful in real time.
Right.
Like,
So why? Because once we deploy the project into the server, it is not like that every day I'm getting some bug and every day I'm fixing the bug and every day I'm going to do the deployment. Deployment is happening once in a month or twice in a month, right? Or even in sometimes it is the deployment happening in 3 months, once in a 3 month, right? Like this, right? So you have to take care of this thing. Right, this is the important thing. Writing the code is not important, but writing the code in a proficient manner, right, in a programmatic way, is more important.
yes.
Right. Okay, guys. Any more question from anyone?
No.
Okay, thank you. So I have stopped the session very early because I am very much interested in cricket. So I have to. You guys, how many of you are interested in watching cricket?
Oh, definitely. I'm like, I love to watch cricket.
Right.
Especially
So,
2020, yeah, because like the taste of one day takes too much time. So
right. So yeah, that's fine. Okay.
okay,
So guys, tomorrow we are having class.
okay, we have class tomorrow.
Yes, because we have taken a day off tomorrow yesterday, na? So we
Okay,
have to adjust that. Tomorrow we are having class, same time, and I would suggest please attend the sessions regularly, because see, entity framework is still there. But whenever you are developing a robust application, right, where you are working with the data which in million, in crore, right? In that case, entity framework is going to be a little bit slow, right?
Oh, okay.
Right. So you should know definitely entity framework I'm going to cover in detail, but if your data heavy application if you are developing, then edu.net is suggested, right? But using edu.net, you have to write lots of code. You can simplify those things using entity framework, right? So if see, nothing is free in this world. If you are using entity framework, most of the things are provided by the framework. Then they are taking little more extra time, right? And if time is not a constant for your application, then you can blindly use entity framework. But nowadays, what I can see, most of the applications they are more focusing on time, right? If I'm developing one API, means within 3 seconds, the API should return the response, right? Otherwise, nowadays, suppose I'm opening one page, and if that page is taking more than 5 seconds to load, then I can simply remove, I can simply close that tab and I can go to the next page, next website, or you can say anything. So performance is one of the major concern nowadays, right?
So as you said, like a web API, right? So like I have heard this word from many of times from you. So like as you said, like once we develop one web API, so like on daily basis we have to work on that daily like a web API, because I'm asking in sense of like a job point of view. Like if once like a few programmers working in a company and they develop few APIs, then what's the requirement of those many developers in company?
See, nowadays, right, the .NET developer, they are mainly used, right, mainly developing APIs.
Okay.
Right, .NET developer, they are mainly developing APIs, right? Once you develop one API, right, then that API can be consumed by different clients, right? Different client in the sense, that client may be client don't think Infosys is Wipro or TCS, right? In this case, that client may be Android, maybe iOS, maybe websites, right? Websites developed using Angular, right? You can develop using React. You can develop using our .NET MPC, right? So basically, so many different client can consume your application. See, nowadays you can take in consideration in any application, right? If you take Facebook, Facebook website is there. Facebook app is also for Android is there. Facebook app for iOS is there or not?
Yes.
Right? That means what? That means now nowadays, whenever we are developing any business, we are not only developing website, but also we are developing mobile applications, right? But if you see, do you think that they are developing some logic specific to Android, some logic specific to iOS, right? Some logic specific to website? No,
No.
they are not developing the same logic for Android, right? They are not repeating the same logic for website. They are not writing the logic for website, and don't think that they are a different database, right? Different
Yes.
DB for Android, different DB for iOS, different DB for website, right? Don't think that, right? One database, right? One logic, and that is possible by using API, right?
So here
Once
you are
we develop, let me complete. Once
Sorry.
you develop the API, right? Then this is like an interface, right? Right? Suppose ATM machine is there. You are the customer. You can go to the ATM machine and you can withdraw the money. I
Yes.
can go to the ATM machine. I can withdraw the money. Is there any limitation?
No.
Do you think that for you they are going to develop one ATM machine? For me, they are going to develop another ATM machine. Is that kind of thing? No, this is
No.
not the kind of thing. So in this case, so this is the API where you have to write the business logic, right? At one place where where you need to communicate with the database, right? So everything is written inside the API. Now Android application and here you have to provide the services, right? One service for login, one service for register, right? One service for booking, right? One service for fetching the data, right? Fetching the data. Service in the sense one method, right? You have developed one method. And that method will take the username and the password and will check whether that credential is valid or not. If valid, it will return that the credential is fine. You can allow the user to log in into the application. Registered is there. Suppose one user wants to register himself, he needs to provide his username, email ID, mobile number, all these things, and you need to store those data inside the database, and then you will provide that yes, this user is registered, right? So now from Android application, someone wants to log in, then this Android application will call my API, call my API in the sense call my login API, login method of my API. iOS user, someone wants to log in from the iOS app, then he needs to call my login method of my API. Website, then again from website, they have to call the login method, right? That means the logic is going to be at one place, one database that is going to be shared by different client. And this is the use of a developer, right? .NET developer nowadays mostly using as part of this part, right? Because suppose someone wants to develop Android, right? They do not have that flexibility that they can directly communicate with the database. iOS, they cannot directly communicate with the database, right? They have to communicate via API. This API provides the flexibility to write the business logic, to write the data access logic, to communicate with the data layer. Everything is going to be performed here, and it is just providing one interface, right? And that interface is going to be consumed by this thing. So API means application programming interface, right? Between your application and your actual business logic, it will act as an interface, right? In a website, right? If you are developing some MVC application, right? Or some MVC based application, then in that MVC based application, you can directly write the logic and you can communicate with the database. But what about Android and iOS, right? For that purpose nowadays, right? Even though the website, they are not writing the logic as part of the website, and they are not communicating with the database. They are even the website, they are still communicating with the API. Now ask me what you were asking.
So basically asking is like actually we are reducing work. We are just creating API and means interface, and like we are in developing some kind of front-end code which
No.
fetch the data.
See, front-end code is going to be developed. See, Android, we are .NET developer. We are not supposed to be interested how Android people going to work, right? So what we are going to do, we are going to develop the API. We are going to provide the signature of this method. We'll tell them this is my login API. This login API will accept the username and password as input, and this login API is going to return this data in the JSON format, right?
Yes. So
That is what
basically,
we need to inform to this Android people, and now it is the responsibility of Android people how to consume this API.
yes. So like basically once we develop API and we are like saying, okay, so our API is done. Like when you run this API, you will get the data in form of JSON format. Now it's your responsibility how you want to represent data on your website. So like this is one job is done, then what about the next day or like after a few months? Because once we create one API, then what is the next task? Like like there are like so many customer which have the project.
We do not care about whether Android one customer, one client or two client or many clients. So irrespective of the number of client, you have to develop this thing one. Once you develop, that's all. They are going to consume. See, once you develop, don't think that once you develop that is done, right? Sometimes some issue is there, right? You have to fix the issue, right? Once you deployment some error occurring, right? You have to check why it is happening, how I can
Oh, okay.
resolve this issue, right? Suppose currently you developed one application that is providing the facilities for recharge, right?
Yes.
You can say recharge or hotel, right? Hotel booking, right? This kind of booking facility you provided. Later they want to enhance. Now they want to implement the flight booking, right? Then that you have to implement fast, right? That is what you have to implement. Main logic is going to be written by you only, right? They are just UI kind of things. They are just simply going to use. They are not going to write the business logic. Important part is business logic and storing the data, communicating with the database. Some new functionality, some enhancement, right? That is coming that you have to develop.
So basically, like you created one API which gives the data for recharge information. Then another day, like after a few months, another customer will go, hey, I want to develop some hotel booking website, and for that I need to
Exactly.
create API. So that is another job. So that's where like clients, there are so many clients who wants different kind of APIs, right?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
okay, okay.
Right. So see, again, I'm saying if you develop this hotel booking, right, irrespective of the client you develop, now you are not targeting to iOS or Android, right? Once you develop this, now if they Android people can use this, iOS people can use this, website people can use this, right? And internally you have to manage, right? Internally you have to manage means, yeah, for Android people, I'm providing this to functionality. I'm not providing this flight booking functionality to Android. For iOS, I'm providing these two things. So from iOS, they should not call this recharge API. Right? For website, they can access all these things, right? That is the part of a security, right? Security means whether the client who is accessing my application, right, my API is a valid client or not. The client, if it is a valid client, the resource, right? Technically, we are saying this as a resource, right? The client who is accessing a particular resource, whether that client have rights to access that resource or not, that kind of security you have to implement in your application, because security is the most important thing, right? So there is something called HMAC authentication, hash-based message authentication, right? Whenever you are getting the data or whenever you are sending the data, sometimes you need to encrypt the data, right? Encryption, decryption is there, right? Nowadays, mostly people are using JWT authentication, right? So you should know how to implement JWT authentication, right? How JWT authentication is working, right? How you are generating the token, right? How you are using the refresh token. So those things you should implement in your application, which will provide security to your application. So in my project, right, that is a banking application. I'm using 3 layers of security. One is HMAP, right? I mean, the request is coming from the client, is coming from the actual client or not. Second, I'm using encryption and decryption, right? So I don't want to transfer the data, right, in a plain text. NCR, right? I don't want to send the data in plain text. I need to encrypt. So SAR 256, SAR 512 is there, right? Those mechanisms I'm implementing, and then I'm implementing using JWT token, or you can say token-based authentication, right? The token-based authentication means the user will generate one token, right? And that token will contain the user information, right? And the user no need to pass every time, right? Suppose he is calling my login API. While calling the login API, he is providing his username and password. Based on the username and password, I generate one token. I return the token to the UI, right? And whenever the user calling any method, right, booking method, fetching data, any API, right, he has to pass this token, right, what is written by my login API, and that token I need to check whether that token is a valid token or not, whether that token has expired or not. From that token, I can get the user ID. From the user ID, I can get the user information, right? I can get the user role, and whether the user having the, whatever the role I have mentioned for this booking method is that user, I mean access to that user or not, right? All these things is going to be checked, right? So this is how you need to develop the real-time application.
So how one can remember all this code, because you are working on C#, then .NET Core, then SQL, then
These
this
are
kind of
one time of activity. Na? These are one time of activity, right? One
Okay.
person is not going to work on each and every model, right? Suppose they are
Okay.
provided, you are working on booking recharge model. Another developer might be work on hotel booking. Another developer might be having flight booking, right? So in my project, right, what I'm following one major and a minor role, right? Major and a minor. Major and minor means one, I'm assigning this recharge model. So I'm basically working as a team lead. So I'm providing this recharge model to one person who is going to do all the activities as a major. And this minor, in the sense, another developer I'm assigning to that recharge model, right? You should know what this developer is doing. If he is on leave, right, and if he left the company, then you have to take the responsibility. So be ready. You should know in and all about this model, right? If anything, if suppose it's not possible that this person is always going to work for the company, or it's
Yes.
possible that sometimes he might be on leave, and if he might on leave or he might left the company, right, this should not impact the application development. You should be ready, right? I'm not going to provide you the KT for this one, right? Definitely once this person resigned, right, before his last, he has to provide the KT session, all these things, but you should know what in and all about this project. And for this person, right, this is recharge model is the minor, and for this one, I can provide another model as its major activity where he needs to work, but you should know all these things. This is the criteria what I'm following in my team,
Okay.
right?
Basically, sometimes I'm just worried, worried and wonder, like when we are going for the interview, like they might ask about SQL, they might ask about like a
Exactly.
C# and
See, in this case, this login method, this API you are developing. For developing this API, you have to write some code, right? That code,
yes.
what you are going to write, that is going to be written using C# language, right? It is going to be written using C# language. If you are communicating with the database, you might be use this ADO.NET, what I'm explaining, or you might be use entity framework, right? The database, what you are going to use, it might be SQL Server, right? It
Yes.
might be your Oracle, it might be your MySQL, right? And all these things you are developing as part of API. So you should know what is API, right? How to develop application, using API, right? Right. So you should
How we can remember all this, like a keywords, like a SQL connection command, then data
you have to
adapter.
remember now. This is you have to remember. So this is the why you are taking the course, right? You know, see, if you are working with ADO.NET means you know what is SQL connection, what is SQL data adapter, what is SQL data reader, what is data set, and what is data table, how to work with the data set, how to work with the data table. You have to remember.
No, I understood this program. Like, if I can see when I see this on program, like I can understand on line number 22 is data adapter field. So basically it's
No,
fetching the data and field.
not only like this, you have to remember. Suppose I'm
Remember, okay.
yeah, suppose I'm providing one option, right? There is a ICICI Bank DB, right? Inside that bank DB, right? There is something called account table, transaction details table, right? Whenever I'm going to perform some activity like cash withdraw, cash deposit, transfer, that information will be stored inside this table. And whenever I'm after updating the amount, that balance will be shown inside this table. For this activity, you need to develop one application. Then you need to think how I can develop this application. For this, what is my SQL connection? Whether I need to use SQL reader or SQL command, whether I need to use data table or not, whether I need to use data set or not, how I can write the SQL command, right? How I can execute those SQL command. Those things you need to decide.
That is fine, but like when we are working, we can Google it. But like at the time of interview, we cannot do Google, right? So like if someone interviewer is asking like if I want to fetch the data as a data set, like what kind of method you are using or something like that.
You have to tell this thing. First of all, I need to create the connection object. Then I need to use the create the SQL data adapter object, and
Okay.
for SQL data adapter taking some data, right? So at that time you have to explain this, right? And if you don't think that I will not remember anything, right? Every time I am going to Google it, then you will not develop, you will not become a good developer, right? So you have to remember, you have to do something by your word.
Yes,
So
got it.
basically, can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. So basically, you need to practice. It should be like a second nature. You don't have to remember anything. When you practice a lot, these things are going to be coming like naturally.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Exactly. Practice and more practice is required, right?
Yes.
So yes, everything you will not remember, but what you can remember, yeah, you need to remember. Yes, if I am going to interact with the database, then I have to use either ADO.NET and Entity Framework. If I'm talking about ADO.NET, then you should know what is SQL connection class, SQL command class, SQL data adapter class, SQL data set class, this field method, this data row, right? These things should come to your mind. Yes, sometimes while writing the code, the syntax might be wrong. For that, you can take the help of your documentation. You can take help from Stack Overflow, Google, Internet, right? These things are available. But if you do not know what is SQL connection, what is data set, SQL data adapter, right? If you do not know the basic meaning of these things, right? Even though if you copy paste the data from the Internet, if some changes you need to do, then you can't do because you do not know the concept. Right? If you do not know what is this field method is all about, right? Then you will not understand what is exactly happening, right? You will not understand.
So interviewer can ask like what are the different method available for
Obviously,
data adapter instance? Okay.
Right? So not like this. So it will ask, so what is the difference between a remove method and a delete method of data set, right? So you have to remember, right? Data table. If I'm removing a data row using the remove method, and if I'm removing a data row by using the delete method, what is the difference between them?
Okay.
What is the difference between SQL data adapter and the data adapter and data reader?
Reader, I see.
Right? This type of questions you will face. What is distributed transactions? Right? What is transactions? Why we need transactions? How you can implement transactions? Right? How you can provide the bulk upload, bulk insert, bulk update functionality in your application? Right?
I see.
Those things.
So it's
right?
all about practice. Like every day you have to practice.
Practice.
Yeah.
Right? Now, practice in the sense by understanding the code, you need to do practice. Practice doesn't mean that I provide the documentation. You just copy the code from the document, paste it here, and run the application without. This is not a practice. Practice means you have to understand the code line by line. What is this connection string? Why I'm creating this variable? If I'm not creating this variable, then what is the problem I'm facing? In this statement, why I'm using this using block? Why I'm passing this connection string as a parameter to this class? If I'm not passing this connection string as a parameter, am I getting any error? No, I'm not getting any error. Now, if I run the application, then what will happen? Right? Why this is happening? If I'm not providing this connection string as a parameter to this constructor, that means there should be another approach, right? The connection string property has not been initialized. That means it is not throwing me error. That means there should be some way. By using that way, I can provide the connection string. Yes, there is some way. How? Now, if you go to this connection string property, right, you have to set this, right? Directly, you can pass the connection string here. You can pass it the connection string property using this. Now, if you run the application, you will get the output. So this thing you should know, right? So why I'm using this data adapter? What is data set, right? Why I'm saying data set again and again? It's a collection of data table. You have to understand this. What is data table? If you do not know, then how you can understand data set, right? So only practice. What is this table name? Yes, inside this data set, inside this tables collection, right? There are many data tables. And if I need to provide a unique name for each data table, then I have to use this table name property, right? And in this case, I'm accessing this table name on the data table start 0 means the first data table. And in this case, this is going to be the second data table. The first data table name, I'm providing this. Second data table name, I'm providing. If you want not to understand what is table name, just right click and go to the definition. What is thing? Get or set the name of the system data table. That means what it means now, it is going to get or set the name of the system data table. Understand?
Yes.
So this is how you need to remember. You do not know what is this data row function class. Go to the definition, expand this thing, right? So it will represent a row of data in a system data table. This data table belongs to system data. So this is the why you can see the fully qualified name it is showing. That means in this data table, if you want to store a data row, right? If you want to store a row, then you have to use this data row class. And while you are fetching the data from this data table, you have to use this data row, which is going to store the row by row data, right? So you can see I'm using here data row. So can I use where you are? Yes, you can use where.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But in this case, using where you cannot access this thing, right? Because it is going to be object type, right? This is the reason why you have to use data row. Right? So these things you need to understand.
One more thing, like, can you go into data row table? And because when you are going into data row table definition, like sometimes when I'm like fetching definition, it collapses all the way. So like I just need to like
Sorry,
uncollapse.
what it is doing?
It's collapsing. Collapsing means on the left side there's a plus and the minus.
Yeah,
So
this plausible you can expand that and
so sometimes when I'm opening definition, it collapses all these classes and the method. So I need to one by one, I need to shrink that to see the definition. So is there any shortcut method I can like
see in this case, I don't understand. See, in this case, there is outline, right? Collapse definition, right? Right click and outline, collapse to definition, and there is an option called toggle. Right now it is collapse. Now you have to outline, right? Then toggle outing explanations of everything is closed. Now outing, then collapse definition.
oh yes, collapse to definition. Yeah, so I was asking about this option. Okay.
Right. Then this is the option. See everything toggle all outlining, right? So you can see all definition, everything is expanded, right? So you can see, right? So just try this thing outline. Just you just try this thing. All the option you just try it and see what is happening in each case.
Okay, wonderful. Yes,
right?
thank you so
Stop
much.
outlining. Right, so everything will be there, right? So basically, you can take help of this documentation, which is provided by Microsoft, right? I'm not creating the documentation by my own. I'm only going through the class definition method, right? And from there, I'm trying to understand the thing and I'm trying to make the documentation, right? Sometimes I'm taking help of internet and all these things, but most of the time, I always prefer to use the Microsoft recommended documentation because
but it is sometimes it is really difficult to understand some kind of definition. So like the way you are explaining is very nice way.
Exactly. See, so this is the right. If why people are not following Microsoft documentation, because the person who prepared the documentation, right? That person, the way he understand the concept, he prepared the documentation, right?
Yes.
It is not like these things are going to be generated by machine. Someone from the Microsoft team providing this documentation, right? So
Yes.
the way he understand it, in the same way he will provide the documentation, right?
It
This
seems
is
like
the-
very high level language. Yeah.
right. This is the reason why we are here, right? If
Yes.
all
Yes.
the people will understand from the Microsoft documentation, then nobody will take the online classes or training, right?
That is true.
To simplify the things, we are here. Okay.
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 Okay. Thank you so much, Pranaya.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.